My name is Logan Wolf, and you are listening to Everything I Did Wrong as a Church Planter, a million-part series.
What did they buy?
And it didn't take me that long to figure it out either. And I say figure out that I did not know what I was doing.
That was one of the mistakes I made. And then the second one was...
That was the dumbest thing I think I could have done.
If you're going into church planning for anything other than a kingdom mindset, then you're really going to be in a mess.
I didn't know what I was doing,
But there were some things that we did wrong.
It was fear of failure.
I'm like, well, that's not that wire.
Part of it was I cannot do this at a sustainable rate.
Dumb. Wow, super stupid.
I'm so excited for this episode. I am joined by a new friend, Adrian. Adrian was a church planter up in New England, up in Connecticut. And man, he's got some stories to share with us just from the experience there. So I'm going to let him go ahead and begin to introduce himself and maybe share a little bit of his faith journey, and particularly just what led him to church planting and what was going on in his life and heart and ministry at that time. And so, Adrian, thank you so much, man, for making time to be with us today. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. I see, I'm not sure how to take that, because it's like you have a podcast and somebody says you should have Adrian on there, and I'm like,
bro, man, it's funny because people were recommending you.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Like, are you saying like that I did a lot of things wrong? Like, come on, man.
Everyone from the outside is looking, is like, this guy's making a lot of mistakes.
Oh, I don't blame him. I don't blame him.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious. Well, thank you, brother.
I appreciate it. I do. Yeah, no, we are, so we were actually, took a pastorate in central Illinois, but, we did church plant. So my family and I were missionaries in Argentina for several years. We had to come back just because we had a lot of different, issues out there, a lot of break-ins. And in one of them, my wife and my kids were involved in that. And, believe it or not, I received some wise counsel, but it wasn't the majority. And it was, it's either your wife or your ministry. Right? Come home for the sake of your family, and I did, and during that time we were just asking God, like, what now? Like, do we start a church? Do we plant? Do we take a pastorate somewhere? Is it youth pastoring? We don't know. But let me start at not the very beginning, but we were able to plant 2 churches in Argentina, so God was really merciful and gracious that He used us to do that. But that was really crazy and I think that's what led us to church planting, because when you think church planting, you're not thinking like, man, I'm going to go to New England. Like, that's where God wants me, I think I've heard it said like, that's where missionaries go to die, And, but one day we were at a church, at a church, like a church camp. No, it wasn't a church camp. It was a camp meeting at church. And this pastor, we have roots in the Independent Baptist movement. And so this guy was in a camp meeting, and he was preaching a message called "He's everything he claims to be and more." And during that message, like, I was fighting with God about ministry. I'm just like, I felt led to the mission field. I couldn't explain it. He wasn't even talking about missions, but something that I was like fighting with. And at the end of that message, man, I surrendered to missions. I went to my wife and I said, well, we're going to fast and we're going to pray and we're going to seek counsel and see what God does. And that was probably about September, October of 2012. And by March of 2013, we began full-time deputation. And we went to Argentina. And man, I don't know. I have ADHD, and some people are just like, well, that's like the gift of apostleship. I'm like, so Paul had ADHD. Is that what happened? I just do what I do, And we went out there again. We planted a church, had a missionary working with us out of that church, planted another church, came back to the States. And that's where church planting started, because now we're kind of in this transition where we're like, what do we do now? Like, my hope, my dream, my desire was to die on the mission field. We were going to buy a house there. We were going to stay there. Like, that was going to be our life. And then like we're caught back in Chicago. Like, what do we do? Where do we go? And my church planting journey actually started because we accepted a position at a church in Connecticut. And but I go in there fresh off the fresh off the field, never having pastored a church before other than, in Spanish on the foreign field in Argentina. And man, I ruffled feathers. I just ruffled feathers. I mean, something that is still true to this day, and I'm sure a lot of people do, is we just stick true to the word, and I just started preaching and it started getting people upset. And honestly, what happened was 6 months after being there, I was asked to resign.
No
So
way.
yeah, leadership. It was leadership in the church, and it wasn't all of them. It wasn't all of them, but they were like, "Hey, we want you to resign," and just like, we just see you as being a church planter and not a pastor. And it's just, and the funny part is that the guy that came after me was a church planter in Central America.
Wow.
So I'm just, yeah, right. Again, what happened was, if we're being completely honest, it was a very unhealthy church. It was a very unhealthy church. Like, have you ever walked in and you're like, "Hey, man, what are the skeletons in your closet? Like what are those idols?" And man, pastor had like 12, 13 kids, which isn't a sin, right?
No.
But dude, he had another family on the side, like, for
Yeah.
years.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
this guy walked into my into my office and told me, like, I'm a product of that relationship. And so, as people come to me and they're like, man, we wish that our father were like your mentor. I'm like, I'm good. I'm good. Not gonna happen. I preach on adultery and sin,
Yeah.
fornication and repentance.
Wow.
And it just, it ruffled feathers. So what happened with that was I resigned. And man, again, I went home and I was talking with my wife,
Wait, so
and
after the 6 months, they said resign, and you just went ahead and said, "Okay, I'm out."
I resigned. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just
And so I just resigned. And then what I did was I had different people just reach out to us, and they're like, "You should start a church. You should start a church." And I'm like, "I'm not just going to start a church. Like, I'm like, no." And, I had different people saying, "We have people, we have a building, we need a pastor." And I'm just like, do you though? I was like, "Listen, I don't know what's going on. My world was just flipped upside down. I just moved back I moved from Argentina to Chicago, from Chicago to Connecticut, all in a year. And now I'm kind of homeless again, where I don't know where I'm going to go, what I'm going to do. I don't know anybody out here, and I don't want to uproot my family again." And I said, "Listen, on Sunday, I'm going to go to a person's house." And they were like another mother to me. They were like grandparents to my children out there in Connecticut. And we're like, "We're just going to go relax. We're going to go to their house. We're going to talk. We're going to have coffee." And all of a sudden, throughout that first week, like, I started hearing murmurings that, like, people were going to be there. And I'm like, why? Why are people going to go there? Why are people going to show up there? And again, my whole intent was just to wrap my mind around things and just like invest in my family at that time. Well, fast forward a week, 77 people showed up. So 77 people showed up, and I didn't know half the three-quarters of them.
Hmm.
Right? I'm just like, who in the world are these people? But the majority of the people in there knew each other, and that's what was weird. And what ended up happening, and what I found out, the church at one point was larger, right? So the church I was pastoring at that point was larger, and they had a split because there was an affair. They had a split because of what happened with the pastor, and they dwindled from like 600-700 down to, not just within like a 5-year span, down to 260 or so, right? 250, 260. And all these people that came to this person's house. Now, 77 in somebody's house is ridiculous.
I know.
It was people who had been part of the church years ago, and they either never found a place to belong, or they weren't happy where they were, or they had come from that church. So the people there were split in thirds. And again, some people were there to just kind of, "What happened? Like, tell us your side of the story." And honestly, like, what I did was I spent 10 to 15 minutes. I told them what happened, why I resigned. It wasn't my idea. It wasn't my choice. And I'm like, "Okay, now we're done. We're not talking about it anymore." Right.
Right.
And I just brought the word. I had already had a message, and I brought the word. And I came to find out that Sunday there was a church building 3 blocks or 2 blocks from where we were meeting in that house, and it had sat empty for a couple of years. And I reached out to, actually, we went over there, whoever was stayed, and it wasn't 77, maybe 15, 20 people went over there, and we just prayed. And we said, "God, just we don't know why this happened, but we know that it's for a reason. Do something." And I reached out to, it was owned by the Christian and Missionary Alliance. I reached out to a local pastor. We talked about the church building, and I think he said something along the lines of, we'll rent it to you for $1,400. Right now, here's what's funny: when the church closed, they left everything in there. So audio, video, drums, piano, yeah, I mean everything was in this church. It was ready to start, and we went, and I had some guys, and I was like, well, I don't have a job. I do not have a job. A man that I really didn't know, who is amazing, just all of a sudden was just like, hey, you need a job? And I'm like, I do. You want to come work for me? I'm like, absolutely. He's like, well, I didn't tell you how much you're going to make. And I'm like, I know you'll be fair. I don't care, and I went to go work for him. And he was one of the guys, along with like 4 other ones that were there at that house, saying, if you plant a church, if that's how the Lord leads, we will make sure that the rent gets paid. Right. And so 6 of us got together. We signed the lease, moved into that building. Right now, check this out. The following Sunday, if my dates are correct, was March 8th of 2020. Now let that sink in. March 8th of 2020.
Right mid.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm sorry. I was wrong. March 8th was when we met in the house. So March is when we were like, all right, cool. We went ahead and we got in oh, sorry, I think I got unplugged. We got this church building, right?
Yeah.
And then everything just shut down. I mean, everything just shut down, man. It was, So I went and like I said, everything shut down, and we just didn't know what to do.
Right.
So we started. We were able to get some funds together, and we were able to just start working on the church, painting. Again, it sat empty for a couple of years, so we started painting, redecorating a little bit, and just doing Facebook Lives. Like that's all we were doing is Facebook Lives. I believe on Wednesdays, I was doing like a discipleship book, like almost like a podcast style, where we were teaching, but me and this other guy were going back and forth, just talking about it, right? And people started tuning in, and we set up a PayPal account, which it probably wasn't really smart. It was in my name. I didn't know what to do. Like, people want to give, and I'm like, here,
Yeah.
Yeah. So that probably goes online.
Don't do that.
Yeah. Don't do that. Don't set it up in your own name. But man, we just started preaching, right? We just started, like, we would play like YouTube videos, and we had people singing to like the soundtracks, and then I'd get up there and I'd preach, and we did these Bible studies. We worked on the church, and we just kept doing that. And what's funny is that Eastern Connecticut is very conservative. It's very like, don't tread on me, right? They're just like, I mean, gun toting. I mean, it was like at our church there, we had an event called Guns and Grilling. And people are like,
grilling.
So, exactly what it says. We brought meat, we grilled, and we shot guns. And they're like, in Connecticut. I'm like, absolutely.
That's awesome.
And so we fixed up the church, and when the mandates came down to shut down, social distance, all this stuff, the church, the people that were listening online were like, no, we're going to meet. We're going to meet. And so we ended up opening the beginning of June of 2020. And I believe like a month or so later, we started launching kids groups. And again, everybody's shutting down. There's no kids group. There's no churches. Everybody's online. And here we are, Faithway Community Church. We're like, all right, we're open for business. Right.
Yeah.
And honestly, man, God blessed. I think our first Sunday, we might have had about, high 30s, maybe 40-ish, in the sanctuary. And it was amazing. And I say that in my Lord, but we were just excited and ecstatic just about what God was doing there. And again, through this whole process, I always stood back, and I was like, well, God, you called us to be missionaries. And I'm like, well, hold on. It wasn't just to like an area. It was just to get out there. It's like, okay, we knew it was Argentina. We knew that it was to reach people. We knew it was to plant churches. And then now we kind of felt out of our element. Like, why did you allow that to happen in Argentina? And why did you allow this to happen in Connecticut? And then why are we now starting a church? And honestly, if it wasn't for any of those, I don't think we would have ever church planted, because my mentality was, I can't do that. It wasn't God can, and God's calling me, right? It was, I can't do that. And that was my mentality. So when we went to Argentina, that gave us our first like taste of, okay,
we can do it. You know, like we went 3 years on deputation and God provided, and we started this church and God provided in Argentina. And then we sent out another guy, and we were having events that were drawing in 800 people from the community in Argentina.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was just like, so that's when we were like, man, God is using us. Like, this is amazing. So then with what happened if it wasn't for the church in Connecticut, we would have never been in New England. And that's what gave us that like taste and getting to know the people. And so when the opportunity came up to plant a church, man, of course we did the same thing we did in Argentina. We prayed, we fasted, we sought counsel, and we're like, okay, we feel this is how God's leading, and we went forward with it. And honestly, God blessed. I'm sure that you're gonna, ask me some questions and things like that. You asked me like what my family thought. Go to Argentina, in the independent Baptist world, it was very, your husband said you're going to Argentina, so wife, you have no option. You're going to Argentina. You just say yes, sir. And I come to find out later that my wife's just like, I just went because you said that we were called, and that's the only reason that I went. I was following my husband. She's I said yes, sir, because if anything wrong happened, it's on you, because I followed my husband.
It's on you.
Yeah, and when we were at that church in Connecticut, my wife just came up to me one day and said, what if we, we should just go plant a Spanish church, because Spanish people are just so much easier to deal with. We should just go do that. And this is while I was pastoring the church with any issues. And that's how we got introduced to the SBC out in New England. We started seeing, okay, well, if something were to happen, maybe we do plant a Spanish church. And we were actually in the process of looking at different locations when we decided to plant there in Eastern Connecticut. But we were looking at Spanish populations because we're like, surely that's what God wants us to do, right?
Yeah.
But no, we again, God bless. We planted in that area because of the people. But it really, and if I'm taking too long, you just let me know.
No, this is good, man. I hadn't heard this story, so this is great.
A friend of mine told me this. He said, when everything happened in Connecticut, he said, you were following the name. And I'm like, well, what do you mean I was following the name? He's like, you saw a church, a larger church that needed a pastor, and you just thought it'd be easy. So you just went there because of the church. And honestly, man, it devastated me, because I started questioning everything. I said, God, I was as sure that you were calling me to Connecticut, that you were calling me to Argentina. And I was 150% sure that you were calling me to Argentina. How could I have been wrong? Was I selfish? Was I thinking about myself, And I was questioning. And then all of a sudden we planted this church, God's blessing, where church is growing. And the same pastor calls me and he apologized. And he said, I was wrong. He's like, I apologize for saying that to you, because what I realized was that God didn't call you to a church. He called you to an area to reach a people.
Amen.
He said that. And I know that I shouldn't find contentment in what a person says, but that really helped me,
Yeah.
I was really like so confused. I was just like, wow. And after that happened, again, we just started, our goal was just to preach the gospel. I'm very, coming out of the IFB, I didn't just, that's how I was raised. So I'm very blunt. So somebody says, well, how do you witness to somebody? And people are like, oh, well, the 3 circles, and you start about with your experiences and how God led you. And I'm like, no, I'm just like, hey, man, if you were to die today, are you 100% sure that you'd have a home in heaven? Or do you have a doubt? Like, I mean, do you not, if you crossed the street right now and got hit by a bus, like, you not say that? I'm like, absolutely. I said, but it gets people thinking, and they're like, oh, I don't know.
Right.
But because of that, man, I preach the gospel. I preach the word of God. I think what the only thing that changed between Argentina and now is that I no longer preach preferences. I just preach doctrine. And if it's preference, I'll go ahead and be, hey, this is what I believe and why I believe it. But if you believe something different, whatever. I'm like, we can still get along. We can still fellowship. I will still love you.
Yeah.
And it's really made a change. And our church out there grew. We ended up within a year, we bought a new building. Within a year.
Wow.
Got into a new building, and we had a high day of 208. And through that church, in the less than 4 years that we were there, we were actually able to send 5 people through the North American Mission Board church planting process.
Right
so
on.
churches replanted, revitalized, new work started, and now we're here in Illinois, and same thing. I kind of found myself asking God, like, why are we in Illinois? You know,
Yeah.
you know how when you candidate at a church, right? You normally try to put your best foot forward, you know? And one of the questions asked was, how do you know that God's calling you here? And I was like, I I I don't right now, I don't know. Right now, he's not. I'm just here to preach for you. I said, if he doesn't, I said, I'm going to go back home to an amazing church family that loves me and that I love, and I'm going to preach the word.
Yeah.
And people were like, you know, and I came back, preached on Sunday, said something similar to that, left, and they called me and they're like, hey, we want you to know that you preached, and immediately afterwards, nobody left the sanctuary. We had a meeting, and you got the 98.2% vote at the church. Yes. And as I'm driving back up to Chicago to catch my flight, I look over at my wife and I'm like, all right, so now we need to pray even harder, right? Now we need to pray even harder, you know?
Yeah.
That's even more. And because now we were caught in what do you call it? Like between like a rock and a hard place. We're just like, man, like we applied to see what would happen, because my wife said this one thing, and this is what I think opened up everything. She said, if we could ever go anywhere, I want to go back to Central Illinois. I want to go back to Springfield, Illinois. And because this is where we got married, this is where some of our family was born,
Okay.
had roots. Because nobody want to go back to Illinois.
I have never once found myself saying I want to go to Illinois.
I know, see, and that's what I'm saying. That's what everybody looks at me like, you're a fool. That people are losing, you're coming, you know. And but yeah, so that's when we started praying. And honestly, within a week, everything was so clear that I looked at my wife and I said, if you are not for this, we are not going.
Yeah.
You are not 100% behind this. And she looked at me and said, God is going to have to do something amazing and show me that we shouldn't be here. And actually, first she said, God's going to have to let something happen, something major, for us to leave. And I looked at her and I'm like, why does something bad have to happen? I was like, why can't we just leave a healthy church that we planted, that is growing, that is multiplying, that is healthy, to go somewhere else?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, like I said, it probably took, well, in a week we knew, but I don't know how much time it was that she finally said, I know that we're supposed to go, accept the position. And we ended up here. And honestly, I was telling you earlier, we hit the ground running. And the reason we hit the ground running is, again, I do have that. I don't describe it this way, but many other people have. They're like, man, Adrian, you have the gift of apostleship.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about putting that on like my business cards or something.
Apostle Adrian.
You know, and but people have said that, and they're like, I'm like, well, what do you mean? And they're like, well, you just have that gifting to just run and get things started and see new ministries and new churches planted. And honestly, within a week of being here, I met with the local church planting director for IBSA. And I was like, all right, show me the area. Where's there a need? And he just literally started showing me just different areas, showed me a town just south of here with a church building that they closed, need a pastor. And I'm like, all right, we can do that. Absolutely. Let's get it started. And as I'm talking to different pastors at these meet and greets, they're like, yeah, we can help you. We can do music. Hey, we can preach. Hey, we can do youth. And I'm like, okay. So now we're praying for the guy. We have a building, we have a people, we have a team. We just need the guy now, you know. But you know, I think in a couple of months, I'm going up to Chicago and working with the NAM assessment process. And you know, we just want to see churches started. We want to see churches revitalized and replanted. And man, I'm just excited to see what God's going to do out here. You know,
I love it.
Yeah,
it's good. Dude, that's so cool. So I love, okay. So we're going to think through some of the, looking back on it now, but your story spans Argentina, New England, and now the middle of the country. So we could maybe even draw some contrast between some of these things. So obviously way different contexts, all of those.
Yeah.
You've got a cross-cultural context. And then New England, I'm sure you knew that Connecticut, depends on the study you look at. Connecticut bounces back and forth, is either the least reached state in America or the second least reached. And the alternate would be Utah, where I am. And so it's an interesting place there. And then to go back, Illinois is the Midwest, I guess is what that is,
I
right?
should have asked you this. How many wives do you have?
Oh, I cannot believe I take all of the people I've had on here, and you're the first one to bring that up. That's hilarious. When you were talking though about the guy with the other family, we were out door knocking. We had prayer walked this neighborhood a while back for like the summer, and then we started just knocking on some doors, talking to people. And this lady came out, and we're like, "Hey, we were just in the community praying for people. Can we pray for you?" And she's like, "No." And so we just start sharing the gospel with her, and she's like, "Well, you actually can pray for me." And then she just goes into this story of her husband had just left her, or she just left her husband because she found out he had was practicing polygamy without her knowing it, and had a separate.
Wow.
It's crazy. So yeah. So I don't have another wife, punk, but but it's a real, but it's a
I
real
just
thing.
figured I'd ask. I just figured I'd ask.
That's called contextualization, isn't it? That's where you kind of, oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. So, okay, looking at your experience. So however you want to draw this, I know most of our listeners are here in the US. And so maybe the story out of Connecticut, but if there's things you can draw or contrast from Argentina's experience as well, looking back on it, what would you say, hey, here are some things I wish we had done differently, approached differently, didn't do it all, because I got a plethora of those things, and
Yeah.
I've been in Utah 13 years now, and I feel like there's things I wish I did differently yesterday. So go.
I mean, I think that a lot of people, I think that looking back on it, what I didn't do, and there's a lot that I
Right.
didn't do. But I think that one of the things was I didn't know the community as well. Like I got to know the community as far as like, oh, okay, there's this many people, this is what's around it. But each of them are so different. Like, for example, we went to when we were in Argentina, the church out there, we were just praying for a building. We weren't praying for an area. We were praying for a building. And then we were praying for an area where there wasn't a gospel preaching church, right?
Okay.
And that,
Yeah.
now, again, not Baptist. We want gospel preaching
Yeah.
church.
I'm with
And
you.
we found this building and we got in there. Now, here's what's funny is that around that was kind of like a middle class community. A little bit farther out was like a higher class. But then right kind of outside of that context was like the slums, like kind of in between the two. They had this like, yeah, there's no other way to put it. Like they were slums where people were like, you do not go in there. Like you do not go in there. So like I had to learn the hard way, as far as where I was going. Now I was going to preach to anyone and everyone. I don't care who you are. So I went to the slums. I just made sure I had no money, no cell phone. And for the longest time, I was a cop, apparently. Like people would hide thinking that I was a cop.
The police.
Yeah. And all right, so here's my ADD mind going, right?
Yeah.
So that leads me to something that I'll tell you later. Remind me about the slum, all right?
Okay.
Slum. So we go, and again, so there's that. We get to Connecticut, and Connecticut is it's very blue collar where we were in Eastern Connecticut, very blue collar. Like everybody had tractors. Like if you needed to move like anything, you're like, hey, do you have a tractor with a post hole digger? Yeah. Hey, do you have a tractor with a bucket? I sure do. Do you have what do you call it? A bucket load? I mean, they just had everything.
Yeah.
So again, just getting to know who these people are, because not everything is going to work. What we did in Argentina isn't going to work in Eastern Connecticut. Right. And then now we're in Illinois, and where we are in Illinois, it's not Springfield. It's just north, a couple of miles in Sherman. Okay. Sherman is so Springfield's the capital. So everybody in Sherman is it's either retired state workers, current state workers. It's funny because we were talking about just putting up a sign down the street, and they're like, oh, well, you got to talk to the Department of Transportation for that. And I'm like, well, how do you get a hold of them? Oh, just go talk to so-and-so on Sunday. Okay. And they're like, oh, hey, well, for this, you got to go to the Secretary of State. Okay, well, when are they open? Where are they? Oh, just talk to so-and-so, and he'll tell you. So like everybody here knows everybody,
Yeah.
But what I'm saying, it's different. Like in Connecticut, we could have done a local food truck and people would have come. We do it here, nobody's going to come. I mean, it's like a 1.8, 2.3% poverty rate,
Yeah.
So completely different context. So I really wish that I would have in every situation just known how to best reach them. And I think that what Connecticut taught me is to do that. So now being in Sherman, I know what I'm looking for, and I'm constantly like, okay, Lord, can I do this? Can I do that? How can I reach this community? Like, for example, we haven't done this yet, but one of the things that I'm thinking of now is when we were in Connecticut, I was on the board of finance. I was on the Little League board, started working with like the police chief out there, trying to get a chaplaincy started. And what that led me to think of is being on the Little League board and coaching soccer actually is how you need to have you need to be like CPR certified, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So like I come here and this town is very big on sports, like huge on sports. And I'm like, okay, how can we be a blessing, right? How can we just be like, hey, we're here and we love you? And what we figured out is there's several nurses in the church. Well, I reached out to one of them and I said, hey, if we trained you on, you know, and I know again, nurse, but I'm like, if we got you the certification for CPR trainer, for AED certification, can you teach classes at the church for the community, for the coaches, right?
Yeah.
And she's like, absolutely. So now I'm thinking again, how can we love on them? Well, let's invest in this one person and let's give them the training that they need to be able to coach these sports, you know, to have the first aid, live, whatever, you know.
That's good.
Again,
That's
just knowing
a
that
cool idea.
different everywhere, you know.
Well, and I think that highlights, like, there's a danger, I think, with church planting that it becomes formulaic and you just think what I've seen work here is going to work here and is going to work here. And when you take that approach, it sets you up for, I think, for some frustration and some disillusionment. And that's why one of the biggest mistakes I think I made, I talked about in another episode, is just like taking church planning books and using it like a checklist and thinking to just do X, Y, and Z. And you get, and it's like, yeah, you're right. It doesn't work the same in all those places. And I think that's also a beautiful thing, is that God actually has to show you have to be invested in the community and these people's lives to know who they are and what matters to them, to speak into it, and not just, hey, they're just faceless, you know, numbers in the attendance record or whatever. It's like, these are actually real people. And so that's a really I think that's a good advice. That's a mistake we made here too. We did this thing, dude. Also, we talk about with Argentina, just looking up and learning about the community. Like, you can Google all the demographics and you can look up all the numbers, but that's not the same as actually living in the community with those people, you know? And I mean, there is something to, like, I can say X, you know, percent is this and X percent's this age or this religion, but then to actually go across the street to your neighbor and look him in the face, put your hand on the shoulder or shake his, like, that's totally different. And man, that's, I think, crucial, that go in and actually learn the community. But that takes time too. So how long, when you went to Argentina, how long between you guys moved there till you found that building and start, like, how much time did you give yourself in that?
It was a little bit over a year.
Okay.
A little bit over a year. But so what happened was we got there and we started working with a veteran missionary that was already on the field.
Awesome.
So we were just kind of serving with him.
Awesome.
But yeah, that really, man, honestly, it really shaped us. It really did. And I'll tell you why. That relationship wasn't perfect. It didn't work out great. We have like a type A, type B personality, you know, so completely different. So we just kind of clashed a little bit. But I'll tell you, in what that helped me is we knew that we wanted to reach people. And, you know, there's different ways of doing so. And like, for example, this person's way of reaching people was, let's reach the upper class. Let's reach the middle class. And we'll have them coming to the church. And when they come to the church, they'll start giving and we'll have the finances to reach out to the lower class. Right. And I mean, honestly, that made me mad. Like that really upset me. And so when we found this church, this building, I told my wife, I said, we're just going to go anywhere. I don't care who they are. And at one point we had doctors, we had unemployed, we had homemakers, we had a cleaning lady. I mean, we had everything in the church at one point. And because we were just going to go anywhere and anywhere, right?
Yeah.
But again, I think that if we talk about a mistake, it's planning more. I am not a planner. I am not a planner. I am like, if you come up to me, okay, Easter's in what, 2 weeks?
Yeah.
So if you say like, right, well, okay, so this Saturday we have like an event at the church, okay, for Easter. Yeah. But if you were to come up to me today and say, hey, we should do an Easter egg hunt on Easter Sunday, my first reaction is, yes, let's do it. We don't have candy. We don't have eggs. We don't have people. We never advertise. But my first reaction is, yes, let's do it. But that's why I've learned to surround myself with not yes people, but people that would actually be like, hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And honestly, and again, it's hard for me, but it started in Argentina because our first deacon was a planner, right? So he was a planner. And what we did is our church, after starting 3 months after we started, I said, oh, hey, it's Day of the Child. we got to do something big. So I went to this like it's called a polideportivo. It's a like an outdoors sports place. Like, you know, you got soccer and basketball and gymnastics and all this, and they had it for the community. And I'm like, can I use your location? We're closed on Sundays. Yeah, of course you can use it. And dude, I was just like, I'm gonna get 10,000 flyers. I'm gonna pass it out. I'm gonna make up a song. I'm gonna put it on the radio. I'm gonna drive around in my car blaring this. I just, you know what I'm saying? And
awesome.
I did. And I did.
And I did.
We had 500 people come in, but our church was only 3 months old. So it was like semi-controlled chaos.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But man, people heard the gospel and they knew we were there. The following year, I have this deacon and he's like, so pastor, let's sit down. How many jump houses do you want to have? Okay, who's going to be looking at those jump houses and for registration? How are we going to follow up with these people? Okay, do you think that 2 people is enough? Well, if you had 500 last year, you're probably going to have more this year. And you said you're going to feed these people too, right? Where are we? And I'm like, listen, I just, you know, so I kind of learned, I'm like, let it be so, you know, just go do it. But yeah, and then that following year we had 800 people, you know,
awesome.
but I've learned to try to plan more and not just be so spontaneous. Like I want to be spontaneous. I don't want to let things just fizzle, but I also, you know, I also want to be wise about it.
Well, and there's a tension, I think, that with church planting, because the beauty of a church plant is you can make decisions quickly because you don't have the long history of ingrained traditions and all this, and this is how it's always been done. And you don't have sometimes the bigger systems and bureaucracy in place, and you can move quick. But that's the danger of it right there, is you can get in over your head on some things. And it's a good idea, maybe executed in haste. So that's a little bit. All right, before I ask you this next question, I'm gonna bring you up what you said. Write down slum. So tell me your story.
Oh, so I forgot it. No, so
why did you have me write that down?
So I went. Okay, so again, I was kind of telling you this. We went and we started going to the slums out there where people are like, hey man, they're gonna rob you, they're gonna do this, they're gonna do that. And we just started going out there like every couple of days and just knocking on doors, inviting people to church, giving them the gospel. And we had by the time that we left, we had an amazing relationship with that community, right? Like people just knew us. And there was a doctor in our church and I forgot where we were going. And I said, hey, I got to make a couple of visits first. Do you mind? He said, no, not at all. As soon as we started driving towards that area, he's like, actually be careful because a couple blocks away is this slum and it's dangerous. You don't want to go in there. And all of a sudden I turn in there. Pastor, no, like, what are you doing? Pastor, we're going to get robbed. And then I start stopping because I see people in the street. He's like, no, you don't do that. You do, you know? And I'm just like, hey, man, how's it going? They kind of shook hands like this, you know? And I shake their hands. How's it going, man? Am I going to see you on Sunday? Hey, how's your wife? How's this? And he's just like flabbergasted, right?
Wow.
Fast forward a couple of months. And we were driving to church on a Thursday for, we had started like a small like Bible Institute type thing. And we were just teaching the life of Christ. And I was on my way to church and we were T-boned by, believe it or not, in Argentina, an F-250.
Wow.
Right? I know. I'm like, oh, how did you make it here? But that thing was like heavy duty, you know?
Yeah.
It crunched up the whole front of my car. So we got into an accident, you know, we had bumps and bruises and the kids were in the car and I didn't know this. Seatbelts really wasn't a big deal. So one of my kids was taking a nap in the back of the car in between the last seat and like we had like a van and then like the door.
Yeah.
And we got into an accident and all of a sudden people start surrounding our car, right? The police come in like riot gear and machine guns. Some had shotguns. And they're like, stay back, you know, and they're looking like, we're here for you. We got you. This is a dangerous area. And I'm like, it's okay. It's okay. And they're like, you don't understand where you are, sir. You're not from here, are you? And I'm like, I'm not. He's like, well, this is a very dangerous, it's a red zone. And I'm like, it's okay. People started coming and taking my kids away because it was cold out. They started taking my kids away. And some people I knew, some I didn't, which probably wasn't that smart.
Yeah.
In their minds, they're like, it's cold. They just got in a car accident. Let's take care of their kids. And they went, took them home. They got them warm, fed them, gave them hot chocolate, whatever.
Yeah.
And when I started hearing the story later, it was like, Pastor, as soon as you got into that car accident, if people started saying there was an accident, and they're like, oh, okay, whatever, that's normal. And they're like, no, no, it's the pastor. It's the pastor. And they're like, as soon as people heard it, man, I'm about to get teary. Every time they heard it was a pastor, people just came out. And that's why we had that thing there. They wanted to make sure that pastor and his family were okay. And it was just amazing because it's an area where people are like, don't go in there, don't go give them the gospel. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Reach others to kind of maybe give them some flyers, but don't you dare go knock on doors. But that's how we build relationships, man. And
that's a cool story.
It was amazing.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Hey, jump back to Connecticut then.
Yep.
Okay. You said you started this streaming stuff first. Is kind of how you did. So that actually, your in-person meetings then were just months later. Like that was a much quicker getting things rolling. Okay. What you're doing, looking back on that then, and it sounds like you left it in good shape. Okay. Anything in that situation from how that got rolling to your departure, you look back on and say, man, this would have been better if I had done this or poured in here, didn't do this.
So something that I started trying to do different in this church, and it all started because of Faithway, and it was casting your vision and communicating with your leadership. I think that we have some, or I believe that the church there has some godly leadership in place.
Yeah.
But I was never able to fully, because I was always go, 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 go. I never cast the vision the way that I needed to with them. The church was like, man, Adrian's crazy and we're going to follow him to the end of the earth. You're like, man, we're going to do it because we know it's all for the gospel's sake. But if it wasn't for me, I don't think we would have done 3/4 of what we actually did. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so I wish I would have cast that vision. I wish that we would have talked more about mission trips. I wish that I would have gotten the people more involved in church planting, because again, we started sending out all these church planters. We started replanting and doing all this, but it was me running it all. It was me finding people, sending people. It was me kind of not organically, but it was me finding people that okay, it sounds bad. It wasn't me finding them. It was Mac Lake had a training in New Hampshire that sent us to. And what he was saying is, he said, write down your people, okay? Write down your people, from your leaders all the way down to those that are serving in your ministries, and even those that might not be. And then ask yourself and pray and say, where can these people be? If I were to invest in them, where could they be? And he said, somebody who's a worker right now, could they be an elder one day? You know what? Don't think that far. Could they be a leader of a ministry? Could they be a deacon? Could they be an elder? Could they be a church planter?
Yeah.
And, we started looking at people that way. And one guy that I'm thinking of in specific, I remember I just reached out to him. Hey man, would you mind preaching on a Sunday? I've never preached. Well, man, I mean, I would love to hear you preach. I'm actually going to be gone. I'd love for you to take my place on that Sunday. And man, he killed it. He killed it. I mean, God, this man. And if he listens to this, man, the one thing he had a problem with is landing the plane. Like we all
keep
do.
going.
He was out of landing the plane, but everybody was like, it was amazing. It was amazing. God used him. So then months down the line, I'm like, hey man, I really need somebody for young adults. Can you lead the young adults group? Well, I don't know if I can, please just invest in them once a week, once every, whatever you can find. And he started leading a young adults ministry.
Yeah.
Then there was a church that their pastor quit and gave like 2 weeks notice. And I called the trustee and I'm like, how can we help you? You're in the same town we are. How can we help you? He's like, well, right now we need preaching. We need people to fill the pulpit. And I gave him, I forget if it was 3 or 6 months worth of, we will be there for this amount of time. I think it was 3 months initially. We'll be there every Sunday for 3 months to fill your pulpit. Don't worry about it. Just stay with me, let me know. And that guy was on that team, was able to fill the pulpit and preach. And by the time that I left, he came up to me and said, thank you so much for believing in me. Thank you so much for giving me that opportunity. So while I left the church, and they don't have a pastor right now, they have an interim starting on the 20th. There are 6 people in that church that can fill the pulpit anywhere at any time.
Well, that's healthy though, and not not have to have outside people keep coming in and doing it. That's awesome, man. That's exciting. I feel like I made that same mistake about not casting vision, because we were all, in my mind, I knew like reach Utah, but I rarely, if ever, was communicating that to the local body. It was always like to our supporters or to potential teammates. And there's so many different ways we could have just been dripping that in, including in the preaching, the sermons, the lessons. And I don't know. I just feel like that was a big loss, because what ends up happening then is, like you just said, you're the one driving it and no one else is running with you and sees where you're going. And it feels like you're in it by yourself. So that's a good word, man. That's a good, and I love what you just said too, about the empowering these people. Cause I feel like it wasn't until much later I started doing that. And I was like holding holding everything, the ministry myself. Like, I'm going to be the one to do it. I'll do it. I'll control it. And run yourself ragged. But
well,
man,
yeah. So I have it here on my like whiteboard or whatever. And it all started church planning in Connecticut, and through that leadership thing, where I have it separated right now between, I have my elders on top, my deacons, and then I have ministries and ministry leaders. And what I'm working on now, which I'm going to present to the elders in 2 weeks, is okay, as elders, we need to invest in each other. So we're going to go through we're going through the book Gospel Eldership, equipping a new generation of servant leaders together, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to go through that and kind of help, just answer some questions and kind of do some training with that. But I said, so we can help each other. I said, but it's our job to disciple those deacons and bring them up and invest in them. And I was like, so then I said, let's grab the deacons and give them ministries. And then the deacons, I don't want them to micromanage, but if there's any issue, I want them to be able to, speak into those ministries, take ownership for those ministries. But I want those deacons to have servant leaders that are leading those ministries. Yeah. So like we're pouring into the deacons are pouring into the leaders are pouring into their workers, and so on and so forth. Because what I learned is to kind of be more hands-off and not to micromanage. Right. And it's, hey, this is how I think we should go. Here's some policies, procedure, whatever the case is. Okay, go and get it done. And I wrote it down here. Remember I told you, give me 1 second. Remember I told you that I did that class. And one thing that I said in that class, if I can find it here really quick, was that we are to invest in other people. Let me find it. It'll be here. Here we go. Effective leaders train, empower, and release.
Yeah.
Train, empower, and release. So when I come here, that's what we're looking at doing is, again, training them to be able, man, okay, go. And I know I was joking with let it be so, but it's kind of like that. I'm like, go and do. Yep. We talked about it. I told you how I envision it, how I feel that it should be run. We've agreed on it. Let it be so. Right. But I don't want to be in charge of the kids ministry. You know what I'm saying? I don't want to worry about who's going to cover the nursery. I just, I want you to handle it. But another thing that I put in there was sometimes they need to run into that wall. Sometimes they need to see that it didn't work so that they can be like, oh man, let me change it. But that's part of empowering them. They have to make their own mistakes, It
is. You're not going to be able to wrap them in bubble wrap and say, I'll protect you from the hardships of what is. Yeah, I think that's spot on. And the empowering, when you do that though, the release, and we're seeing that now in the ministry here in Utah, is it creates ownership for it. It's like, this isn't just Logan's or just Adrian. Like this is what God's called me to do. Like, I'm doing this. And that's so much better than this top down, I'm telling you to do it. It's like, I want to do this because I see what God's calling me to. So
well, I just told the church this, and I said, I don't want you to give to the ministry. And you're like, oh well, hold on, no, we want you to give. Right? I was like, no, I want you to share in the ministry. I want you to share. And I'm like, because when you give, you're saying, hey, here you go, right? Here you go do. And I'm like, no, I want you to share in it, because I want the vision and the mission of this church to be your vision, to be your mission, so that together we can move forward. Yeah. And again, so I got here, and again, this is all quick, and not anybody can do this, and it might not be the wisest way to do it. But I came in, I got here January, like I started my trip out here January 1st. So I was here by like the 3rd. And within a matter of like 2 months, we had a mission trip to India already set. I invited some of the elders and the deacons, and I think we have like a couple of future ministry leaders, and we have 2 deacons going. One elder was going to go, but then it's his anniversary. So I told him, I said, it's either God or your wife, man. Which one is it? And well, he chose his wife. I'm joking. But we're going to India. And I told the church, I said, the reason that I did that, I said, is I want them to catch the fire, and I want them from the top to come back and say, man, this is what we saw. This is what we need to do. And then let that spread down. So
Yeah.
I learned in not doing that in Connecticut that here it's got to start with leadership, and you got to communicate that vision with them, you know. And again, if I made one huge mistake, honestly, it was that. It was I did not communicate the vision to the leadership.
Man, that's good. I appreciate you sharing that. Hey, okay, so I know we've been talking for a little bit. Let's move it. So this has been great.
See, I'm causing you to edit this now. See,
now you're gonna I'm gonna have to. I'll go back and cut that part out where you wrestled with your microphone. What any other advice? Let's get practical. So guys coming behind you thinks, hey, I'm gonna be a church planner too. And maybe this is resonating with him. Hey, okay, I want to make sure that vision's up front. Anything practical you would tell him around how to do that from the get-go, or any other advice just practically as a church planner? Say, hey, I've done this. Here's something to keep in mind as you're preparing to go start a church. Anything like that?
Do it again. I'm sorry. Say it again. To do what again?
If someone is about to go be a church planter,
yeah,
and you're just going to give them some advice, what are some things, since you've done it, you would say, hey, let's keep this in mind, do this, just some real quick, kind of a
if mentor. You don't mind, I'm literally going to read something that I have here that focuses on that.
Yeah, go for it, man.
This is what I did, and I'll do it quickly. All right. So in total, there's like 10 things, right?
Okay. Yeah. Let's hear them.
Man, focus on the main thing, right? Focus on the main thing. All right. And for me, it's always been the gospel. Just focus on the word of God. I think that people don't want it watered down. They don't want a weak version of Christianity. They want to hear the word. But while you are focusing on the main thing, make sure that you're genuine, right? You know what I'm saying? Make sure that you are genuine in that you do love them, right? Yeah. What else is it here? Number 2, focus on the vision that God's given you, and then make every decision based on that vision. Now, I'm a people pleaser. And if somebody comes and says, Pastor, I want to do this, I'm like, yes, let's do it, because I want you to be happy, and I want you to serve, and I want that to make, I want you to get involved in the ministry. But not everything is profitable for the vision. And if God's given you a vision for your church, everything needs to run through that vision, right?
Good.
So there's this man out in Boston. His name is Kevin Jones. And he, I'm sorry, not Kevin Jones. Kevin Jones is somebody else. Yeah. Oh,
there is a Kevin Jones.
I forgot his name. But he started, Kevin Scott. Okay, his name is Kevin Scott. And he started a church out there called Church at the Well. And he had this saying that I can't get out of my head. It's, apparently I can, because I forgot it now. Keep fast to the vision, but loose to the method. Or hold fast the vision, but loose the method. And what he was saying was this. He's like, man, we had a vision, right? Where we were going to start a coffee shop. And as we started this coffee shop, it was going to be profitable enough that on Sundays we would be closed and we would have church in the coffee shop. So hence Church at the Well, because it was the Well coffee shop. And he said, man, we got our break being in the subway. We had a 4x4 foot, area. And man, praise God, we had a coffee shop, but we can't have church there. He's like, then we were in an office building and we couldn't have church there either. But we knew that God called us to start a coffee shop to have services in. And I forgot how many years had gone by until he was able to start a coffee shop in downtown Boston, right? Next like City Hall there, and have church on Sundays, where they would just shut down, put up partitions, separate it out, and have church in the coffee shop. That's awesome. He said, we always had the vision, but the method to get to that vision constantly changed. Yeah. So we had, hey, we're going to go from point A to point B, right? He's like, but sometimes it changes. So hold fast to the vision. And one of the ways that happens is by us running everything through it. But then, and this is hard for those ADHD guys, is have a method. You know what I'm saying? And again, all these are things that I struggled with, is have a method as to how you're going to do it. I try to do it all, and have that methodology. Talk to people. Well, what's going to work in your area? Like we started doing, we did coffee and donuts for our sports team for like Little League opening day, and I'm just like, yeah, that's going to be great. Let's do that. And then my wife's like a coffeeaholic. So we did cold brew too. So we had coffee, cold brew, and donuts, right?
That's awesome. Yeah.
On opening day. But that was a huge hit. People were like, wow, these people are investing in our community. But again, we had to have a clear strategy as to how we were going to do that. And then that led us to, we talked about earlier, just not being a micromanager, not being involved in everything. It's not, you don't want people always coming to you. And I get it. In the beginning, you're the church planter, and we
Right.
didn't do this either. But that's why it's important to have like a core team that you're meeting up with, that you are teaching, that you're leading, that you're training. Because we didn't have that. We had people that wanted to serve, but I was too engulfed in the excitement to be able to say, okay, hey, how are we going to do this effectively, and how are we going to do
Yeah.
this together? We started, like, people started being in charge of the kitchen with coffee and donuts because somebody came in on a Sunday saying, I want some coffee. Oh, can you make it? Great, do it. But
Yeah.
but again, a lot of it was me just trying to do it. And I hope this answers your question, right?
Yeah.
But then having clear leadership roles, and I think you see that, like, who are the leaders? What are they going to do? What are they over? And then how much freedom do they have? How much do you really want them to run by you?
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
Again, it's just we ran through a lot of that. And then this was hard for me, and I'm trying to do it different here, and it's to develop others. We heard in Connecticut, somebody told us, they're like, we keep talking about church planters, we keep talking about sending out and multiplying, right? And which is what everybody's talking about. Like, it seems like multiplying is cool now, right? And but they keep talking about it, and they said this, they're like, guys, nobody's coming. Nobody's coming. They're like, you're in New England and you're expecting Texas to send you a church planter. You're expecting the Bible Belt to send you somebody to plant your next church campus. They're like, nobody's coming. What are you going to do about it? And the whole point was, develop your people, disciple your people. Disciples make disciples that make disciples. And it's like,
Amen.
who are you discipling? Who are you investing in right now? Not who are you giving a course to? Who are you doing life with and investing in? And man, if I could
That's
change
good.
anything, it'd be that. Mac Lake said the greater reason for developing leaders is to cultivate the God-given leadership gifts in others.
Hmm.
And man, I hope I'm not going too fast.
No, this is good stuff, man.
Kind of throwing it all at you. We talked about communication and how that was one of my big failures there. But we need to communicate if we need to communicate what will happen if we don't make a change or if we don't multiply. I told our church, I said, statistics show that if we do not plant a church within 5 years, we never will. We have 5 years to be a multiplying church and to make that part of our DNA. And everybody got on board. Again, it was hard with leadership because I just talked to the people on Sundays. But the people were like, yes, we need to do that. We need to multiply. So we made sure that we were always putting money aside for church planting, investing in those church planters. But we need to let them know what was going on. And I'll probably finish with this. We got to not focus on what we don't have. If somebody's going out there to plant a church, it's always like, well, what do you need? Money. Well, okay, we don't have money. What else could you need? Partners. Okay, there's no partners. What else do you need? People. Dude, focus on what you have and not what you don't have. And I was talking to a pastor last week about it, and I said, same thing. He's like, we need people. And I was like, dude, but what do you have? He's like, I have a core group. And I'm like, let me ask you a question. Does that core group love you? Do they follow you? Do they support you? Or do you feel loved by them? And he's like, yes. Focus on that. That's who you have. Don't focus on we need more people, or we need a building. Focus on what you have. And you have people that love you and are willing to follow you. Now train them up. And it's that, if we could just not focus on not having the best sound system or having a worship leader, honestly, just do your best, get out there and glorify God. Make the mistakes as it happens. I mean, again, we started off with YouTube videos and, I think 3 ladies singing, and then we added a cajon, and then we added a piano, and then we added, little by little.
Come on, man.
Focus on what you have. So
that's good.
Yeah, those are my big ones. And again, I'm not saying that because I'm an expert. I'm saying that because I failed. I ran into the wall, man, and I feel like I didn't do anything right, and God was just like, you didn't, but I still used that.
You didn't do anything right.
Really? I mean, I loved on people, I loved on people. I preached the word, but other than that, man, I really feel like I failed. But then I look back and I'm just like, well, God used my failures, man, and he used it.
That's right. He's gracious, brother. He's gracious. That's awesome. Adrian, thank you so much, man. If someone wanted to connect with you in some way? Do you have like a church website, or is there somewhere you could push people? How could they do that?
Yeah, so we're redoing our website, but you can
Okay.
hop on it. It's livingfaithbaptist.org. Or you could just email me at pastor@livingfaithbaptist.org. It's very ingenious, right? That website. So again, pastor@livingfaithbaptist.org. But honestly, man, I would love to talk to anybody. You're like, right now we are just, and again, I'm not an expert in any sense, but God's also allowed us to be involved, like, just kind of like you said, Argentina, Spanish missions, New England, Central Illinois, that we kind of tend to, get along with a lot of people and have something that we're able to kind of help them with, or at least help them brainstorm through some things. Whether it's replanting, revitalization, church planting, man, I would definitely love to help somebody out with that. But yeah, man, I really appreciate you having me on. I know I'm not, again, nothing special and, just full of mistakes, but
Hey, it wasn't as many mistakes as everyone made it sound like it was going to be. Everyone made it sound like
stop. And you know you remember who that was, don't you? Yeah. You should bring him on. He hasn't planted, but
Come on.
I've done wrong as a pastor.
Come on. I've been talking to Adrian, church planter, pastor. We heard his story from Argentina to Connecticut out to Illinois. Again, my name is Logan. I am in Utah, and this has been Everything I Did Wrong as a Church Planter, a 1,000,000-part series.
You forgot to add. And I only have one wife.
Shut up.
Hold on, I think my audio went off here a little bit. It said that it had turned off. Give me a second. I'm sorry.
Yeah, man. No
You're gonna edit.
Right? Maybe. Editing feels like such a hassle.
All right. Well, so I'll leave it as is.